Welcome to Transform Your Workplace. I'm your host, Brandon Laws, and I'm so thrilled that you decided to join me for today's conversation with Nikki Innocent. Today, we're getting into the realities of the modern workplace, the hidden moments that shape our careers, and the powerful ways that curiosity and authenticity can transform our work experiences. In our conversation, Nikki shares a compelling story about a coworker's mysterious disappearance that became a pivotal moment for her, reshaping her understanding of workplace culture, humanity, and leadership. We'll get into why workplace environments often avoid uncomfortable conversations and how that silence can lead to toxic cultures. Nikki also sheds light on the critical importance of embracing our humanity at work, from navigating tough emotional moments to fostering genuine connections. We talk openly about breaking away from outdated norms that keep workplaces rigid and how leaders can create spaces that value people over productivity alone. This episode is packed with honesty, vulnerability, and valuable insights that you'll find immediately applicable whether you're a leader striving to build a healthier workplace culture or someone navigating your own professional journey. Before we get into it, today's episode is brought to you by Xenium HR. And if you're looking to elevate your team and leadership capabilities, make sure to go check out Xenium's comprehensive learning and development programs, which include leadership cohorts for emerging and senior leaders, on-demand learning, micro-learning modules, and engaging monthly virtual workshops. Go check them out at xeniumhr.com. Oh, and if you love this conversation with Nikki Innocent, please do me a favor, share this episode with your network and hit the subscribe button. And if you're enjoying our content, we'd very much appreciate a quick rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Your support helps us grow and bring more great conversations your way. All right, here's the conversation with Nikki Innocent. Nikki, it is such a pleasure to have you on Transform Your Workplace. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Oh my goodness. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited about this conversation.
We are going to just have so much fun. We've got a lot of different things we want to touch on. And one of the things that, that stuck out to me as I was planning this conversation with you is you had maybe a situation in the past where you had a coworker just suddenly disappear. I don't know what the situation was, but just that's probably shocking for you. Just walk us through that experience and how that moment maybe reshaped the way you thought about the workplace.
Oh, yeah. It's so funny. I think that in the moment, I didn't realize the gravity of it. When I was working in corporate, you kind of just dealt with what was in front of you. It was a lot of reactive stuff and just like get your to-dos done. And so when the person that you were used to walking by and saying hi to wasn't there, you're like, oh, they must be on vacation. Oh, I wonder if they had a family thing but nobody's talking about him. Okay, now, yeah, you were on his team, but you were the more junior folks. Where did he go? And everybody acted like we don't like Voldemort, like we don't say the name. And I was like, what is going on here? And so this person, I had been working with him for years. And in particular, we used to work together on a lot of event type work. So you were in crisis with this person, he and I, we talked about not just the work things, but the life things. And so when he just stopped showing up to work, I didn't really understand what had happened. And even because I'm a curious person, always have been. My parents wish probably I was less curious as a child, and all my teachers are the same. But I started asking, what happened? Where did he go? Is he okay? And nobody would answer, which then I feel just creates even more lore and drama. I'm just could you just say it doesn't work here anymore? Is that it? Can we deal with that? And it took a couple years later for him he emailed me with a picture of him and his family and was like, hey, just wanted to let you know, I ended up joining the military. And I was like, oh, good, great. Was it a good thing for you? And it ended up being more that the complexities of the situation had created no easy exit, because our company didn't really allow for you to acknowledge when people left. And it's funny because at that moment, I had known him going above and beyond everything he was doing. Everything I had witnessed was not only a great review employee, you would get all A's or whatever the highest marks would be, but, he was going on his personal time and taking care of things for the leaders of our company before they would ask. And he would, use his own personal car to take, all of this stuff. And I was just like, these two things don't compute. How is it possible that this is happening? And in that time, I also was having a lot of physical issues personally. And I thought, oh, well, this is just me not being strong enough to handle. Now, again, burnout wasn't something we talked about. And I witnessed his kind of disappearance and then reemergence as oh, wait a second, like a glitch in the matrix, really, of even when you do all the right things, this dramatic mystery of disappearance and then people acting like you never existed in the first place. There's something much deeper there. It's not about this individual. It's not about my body not being able to withstand this. Something about this setting doesn't allow for the nuances of humanity or even disagreement, which is the assumption I will make about the departure, to exist with us handling it like human beings that are looking to repair something that broke, even if the end of the day means that you're not working there anymore. And so I think that there was just a lack of humanity that came about in the face of like the mess that it is to be human, that I realized, okay, this workplace that again is well known and people really want to work there. And there's a whole lot of like, you're so lucky to be here, that I was like, those things can be true. And also, what about the person that I saw being incredible at his job, an incredible human to be around, not being able to be seen or valued as that individual, if not the professional? And so I think that those two things, when I say a glitch in the matrix, I feel like it really was one of those moments that I was like, I was around 30. I was like, I have literally been following what I thought was the right path and doing all the right things to get to what I think is like the mountaintop of success to this place. And this glitch showed me that like, oh my goodness, this is like,
Naive.
I don't know if you ever saw The Truman Show, but it was like,
oh yeah, I love that
this
movie.
isn't even real.
Yeah.
So what do I do with that information now? Like I can still, and I went through the motions at the organization for a while, but it had me noticing the things that you weren't supposed to see, the strings that were being pulled that you were never supposed to notice. And so I think that particular element just had me curious and asking and digging more into like, why are we doing the things that we're doing? And also as somebody that like my physical body was rejecting it, how is that impacting my ability to be a human being outside of the four walls of this place? And I know him now. He's since become a client of mine. So like it came full circle over a decade later, but how that all played out to kind of dehumanize. And then this work that I've been doing around like understanding the systems of oppression and how they impact our interpersonal dynamics, but also systems and structures and policy in the workplace, it then allows me to kind of rehumanize that break that had happened, again, 10 years before.
That's a bizarre moment. I mean, every workplace probably experiences something like that. But what's really frustrating when I hear things like that is like, why do employers not communicate effectively? Because what's happening in those moments is contributor level people, even leaders who might not be privy to the situation, we're going to make up stories in our head. We're going to fill in the gaps. And if you went a couple of years without even talking to him after like he joined the you had no clue. And so you're like, did he fall off the face of the earth? Was there a bad exit? Like you have no clue what happened. And maybe there's some things we're not allowed to know because of
confidentiality.
Personal private, yeah, exactly. But some communication is more human than no communication, because to me that seems toxic not to share something.
The same environment when I left, I had worked there for a good chunk of years. I had worked there through some pretty big things. Like one of our founders ran for president. Like we had a bunch of stuff going on that was like high stakes. So we'd been through some stuff. When I gave my notice, and I gave a very long notice because I wanted to be very considerate of the people that were working there and the ability to transition, blah, 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 blah. My boss just stopped talking to me. Like we hardly even said goodbye. And so it was this kind of very large, dramatic moment of someone disappearing. But I think in the micro ways that when we are not allowed to, and witnessing conversations that are messy or difficult or uncomfortable, it then creates all these like interpersonal fissures that aren't necessary because the environment hasn't been set up for us to actually talk about difficult things. And so, yeah, the toxicity, and the thing I feel like that happens when we talk about toxic workplaces is it's like, oh, well, that was a toxic boss. And it's like, okay, but I actually think it's more that the environment, I always talk about it like a marinade, that like we're marinating in toxicity, and then we think we are toxic because we smell like the marinade, or the marinade has permeated the top level of our skin. And I usually talk about it as garlic because that's a little easier to understand. Like if you're marinating like chicken in garlic, the chicken doesn't magically become garlic, but it does have the remnants of that. And so if we give ourselves permission when we look at workplace toxicity to not point a finger and say, you are toxic, but realize that especially traditional workplaces and the ones that are trying to do the things the way they've always been done and not acknowledging the gaps in our ability to be human, or even to navigate the innovation of technology, or even just how the workplace foundationally, the foundation crumbled in the last 5 years or so, if we're not able to acknowledge the need to figure out where sturdy footing can be, it then starts kind of bubbling over in different places where we think it's that person and I don't get along, rather than the entire situation is set up for none of us to feel stable.
I love the analogy. I love you're pointing that out, because I think it's bad bosses and bad leadership is a product of a systemic issue within the culture. And if we don't address that, we don't stand up for what we believe in and have a strategy around belonging and psychological safety, all these things that make great workplaces. The easiest thing to do is going to be pointing the finger at that one bad boss, but really it's rooted in something else.
Yeah. And, I think it does us all a disservice. I think that when we're constantly putting ourselves in a hero and a villain binary, that both of them are really dehumanizing. Neither is allowing you to be a whole human that has good and bad traits and is learning things and is evolving and growing. And yet we were brought up on storylines that have a very clear hero or villain. We have good and bad and right and wrong as very extreme things. And I think that at the very least, in the type of work that I do, one of the kind of cornerstones of why I do the work I do is this belief that we have kind of veered too far into what Zuckerberg was talking about, the kind of masculine dynamic that isn't really about men, if it makes sense. The kind of masculinity of it is taking everything that is seen as masculine, but then like doubling down on it being something that's separate from humanity. And so the inability to talk about hard things or have feelings, like I was just in a conversation last week and I was like, so there's no crying in baseball, there's no crying in the workplace, like that kind of energy, when we all just went through an extreme amount of collective grief together. Millions of people lost people in their lives that they love and were expected to show up every day at work. Yeah, there's going to be crying at work. Like, yeah, there's going to be complexity in that. And so I think that the permission for us to allow ourselves to understand that if we're going to look at the kind of gendered trait spectrum, that the feminine traits are really powerful and necessary too. But the goal isn't to go from one end of the spectrum to swing it to the other. It's really to understand that each and every one of us, no matter what your identity buckets are, you have those skills, those traits, those options in order to understand yourself and the world around you in a way that you can show up authentically. And I always talk about like lobotomize, when we try to cut those parts of ourselves off, we wonder why we then run into the same walls again. We then become, oh, I hate that person. It's like, why? Well, because they did that, this, that, and the other thing. Or I hate that person because they never make me feel safe. Well, what would make you feel safe? I actually don't know, because I've never been able to have, the priority to self-reflect, the space and the time to be like, how did I just show up? It's all reactive. At least for me, we used to use the turn of phrase CYA, cover your ass, all the time as the baseline of how you're operating. And that is not a place to build a sense of self-trust, let alone communal trust, to be able to handle, again, the problems of today and the challenges of tomorrow.
Yeah, there are a lot of them, right? And if we can't talk about those things and realize that all of us are going through something at any given time in our households, families, crisis, whatever, and we're bringing that to work. And the fact that we can't cry at work, that's crazy to me. And I hear you about the masculinity comment. I just hate the binary thinking of it's like got to be one or the other. I work with like 95% women in my work environment. I'm already pretty emotional for a male, but I see the power and just being open with each other, and just the fact that like, hey, we're all human and work can get done so much faster. I wish people understood that. It's like when you open up and you actually care for another person, especially in a manager-employee relationship, and you can ask those questions like, how are you doing? And you actually mean it. Have you had any experience with that? Like just having a great manager or having a great colleague who you can just be real with?
I mean, I'll say the nature of who I am as a person, I don't do surface for long or well. So even if, I'm in an environment where someone is like, we stay work serious. I'm like, yeah, sorry, I'm going to thaw that cold shoulder. It's just not going to work. So I think if anybody has worked in, around, been in any, even if you're sitting next to me at a bar, usually we're going to end up having some version of a human conversation about something. And you and I, right, we started talking about applesauce before we hopped on here. That wasn't our plan. Like, being human is something that if you give yourself permission, it's so easy to connect with people. But I think when we put ourselves in like a work confines, we're told, well, you can't bring that here. You can't do that here. And so I'll give an example. And this was early in my career. One of I would say one of probably the most profound managers I had, she wasn't even my official manager, but was the first person I had witnessed. Her name is Dawn, and that I had witnessed showing up and allowing for like friendship to be a thing that is prioritized at work. And especially on a hierarchical structure, being like, even though you're more junior than me, even though I've been here for, 15 years more than you, I have more experience than you, it doesn't mean that I'm superior to you. It doesn't mean that we cannot have a rapport. It doesn't mean that you have to kind of defer to me. I want to hear from you, but also I care about the person you are and what you bring into the workplace that's not about your job. Because again, she's a creative, she's a brand genius. I love her so very much. And also the permission that she grants in showing up that way herself. So not just saying those things, but modeling them as well, talking about herself and her life in a way that's boundaried enough. It wasn't inappropriate, but it was something that allowed for there to be human connection. So and she still works there, her work is high octane, like high pressure. You are working all hours. And so if you're working with somebody in that situation and you don't have a human connection with them, I mean, I truly can't imagine that. And we talk about kind of the masculinity of it all. And again, it's like whatever the caricature of that is, because it's not real how it happens for most people. But I think of like one of the more masculine things, which is, the armed forces is seen as like so masculine. And in that environment, you are building deep, personal, human, vulnerable relationships because it is life and death, right? And so the idea that those things aren't allowed, and then you look at how it plays out in real time, those are the places and the moments where you become the most human, you become the most connected. All those divides and those identity buckets, they disappear. And so I think that is a really important part of this. And then I'll also just add, one of the things that I've been witnessing in my work where I go in and people will hire me for organizations, and sometimes it's a one-on-one coaching experience with people within a team. So like I'll end up coaching individually each member of a team so we can ensure that we build a culture of trust, or we can repair divides, or we can really navigate a lot of turnover, or whatever that might be. In the last year or so, I've worked with a lot more men, and every single one of these men said to me, I've never been in an arena like I've never had the space to have this kind of conversation about work. And one guy in particular said to me, and the way that I had to keep myself together and not tear up, he said to me, Nikki, I've never been in a work situation where I felt like I could be a human and not a robot. And this is the first time I'm feeling that way. And he was, many decades into his career. And to be honest, like I wasn't doing anything revolutionary. Like I'm not, there's not some secret sauce or 5-step plan to get there. It was just showing up and being like, yeah, what you just said is legitimate. That's a real difficult thing to do. How did you feel about it? Like, what do we need to have happen next? Where do you feel like you're having a lot of frustration about this so we can detangle it so that we can engage with it moving forward, rather than saying, oh, this is uncomfortable, let's get rid of it. Or let me believe there's something broken or wrong about me because this is hard. Just giving the permission to acknowledge difficulty. And that doesn't mean that you're a failure and it doesn't mean you're weak, but the permission to say that if I can acknowledge those things and feel my emotions, I'm actually stronger and more equipped to figure out what the solution might be.
I think of like where we're at right now. There's always been global conflicts and election seasons, but those things weigh heavy on a lot of people in different ways. And it's all, you don't want to ever dismiss somebody's experience and what they're feeling in the moment. I'm the type of person that doesn't want to like dwell on it and even necessarily talk about it in the workplace, but can we acknowledge people and how they're feeling? Because that does weigh on them when it comes to the workplace. And, I hear the word burnout a lot. So when these things are happening all around us, whether it's, across the world and we're feeling that, or a recent election and we're feeling that, or something happened in our life, the death of a loved one, caring for a family member, and you still got to show up to work. How do we address that? So that way we're feeling needed and humanized and part of something, like, I don't know. It's unpack that for me, because I'm sure you've dealt with this and thought
it's
about
literally,
it.
That dilemma is one of my favorite places to be, because I think that the answer to it is infinite. an answer is the same as a fingerprint. There are so many different ways you can do that, but really the way that I recommend for people to do it is with curiosity and permission to explore what is actually needed in that moment and the people in the moment informing it versus feeling like, okay, I dealt with this 15 years ago when I lost my mom, so I'm going to do it the way that I felt like this should have happened. Instead saying, I've had an experience where I've lost a parent. It was really challenging for me. I'd be really curious to understand, how can I help you right now? And if you're not really comfortable with answering that question yet, know that the door is open. And I want you to feel supported because I see you and I value you. And I know that a loss of somebody that's really important in your life impacts way more than the 3 days of bereavement leave we offer. And so I just want you to know that while you might need to come to work because our policies and systems and structures make that happen, that this arena is understanding that you are a human showing up with all that too. Again, a client of mine, I'm going to plug someone else's stuff. One of my friends is, she used to work in like consulting and everything, but she then had a significant loss in her life. And she channeled all of that into creating a greeting card business that is wonderful. And I had her on my podcast. Her name's Janine Quo, and she has a company called Quotations. And she created a book that's called Welcome to the Grief Club. And it's an illustrated guide of sorts. But I've had clients where they actually lost members of their team while we were working together. And so like, not only is it something that you're dealing with outside, but like, this is our work family and we just lost somebody over the weekend, abruptly. And like, how do we handle both the stuff we have to get done, but the extreme loss we just had as a member of our family? And everybody has a different reaction or experience with grief, whether that be because you've had experiences of it before or you're trying to grapple with it for the first time. And then you're supposed to do it as a professional version of yourself that might have a review coming up or something, So like all these different versions of yourself you're trying to navigate. And so one of the things I recommended for the manager to do was, can you buy this book? Because they had asked me, like, what would you recommend? I said, you can buy this book. This is what I do to any person in my life that loses someone, because this book is, every time you open it, there's a new page that gives you permission to experience it in whatever way works for you, even if that version isn't yours. And so the beauty of it is, here, there's a resource, because no one knows what to do. There's no right way to do it, right? But you're not alone in this experience. But it also then, and it's great because we've since had conversations, it also opens the door for when you're ready, that you can pull that cute little illustration either front of mind, you can talk about it, or you can have the book and you can use it. And so I think that resource in and of itself allows for the intimate experience of, this is really hard. I'm having feelings and emotions about this. Am I doing it right? Oh, wait, there is no right way to do it. But there's a lot of different ways that people have, processed this. Let me look to that. But it also allows for you to create a separation if need be of, hey, I just read this page here. Can we talk about this? When it's really like, I'm having a hard time about this. Can we bring it here? So it gives, I think, the elasticity that is needed in these moments, that you can engage as much or as little as you feel comfortable, especially in a professional setting, with the existential issues. And I think I'm talking a lot about like death and loss and grief, but I think as we're talking about politics and we're talking about global conflict and we're talking about climate change, and I think especially when we talk about new generations coming into the workplace, these are conversations that have been imperative from very young ages. And so there are folks that, again, the no crying in baseball energy to work, the traditional way of looking at work, it's very hard to imagine talking about things. But there are folks that are like, we had active shooter drills before I understood what a gun was. So I was always doing some version of having to navigate the meaning and value of my life and how I was navigating that in the formal setting of school, which that is what work ends up being for adults, this kind of formal space that we come together in community. And so I think that there is a level of aptitude and familiarity with having to navigate both existential dread and productivity that younger generations are bringing in. And I wouldn't even just give it to younger generations. I think that this is, if you look at older generations, when it was wartime, same kind of thing of having to juggle all this stuff at once. But I think the workplace isn't necessarily set up in its traditional sense to hold that. But the demand of the people that are actually in this space navigating this stuff, and you talk about the millennial generation, which has been called the therapy generation, like we don't do silence about this stuff anymore unless we want to continue generational harm. And so what do? We try to create ways to hold enough space for everybody across that spectrum to be able to kind of process the reality of today without it being, you're going to get fired, or, it's like not an all or nothing of it, because being human is so complex and so messy. Truly, there isn't a 100-point scale on how am I doing that right and how can I get graded. But I think the permission to acknowledge that and to be able to have conversations about the impact of how people might show up in their messy is important. And I think, again, one of the things you had asked was like the how do we create a workplace that way? I think modeling is a huge part of it. I think permission to stumble is huge without it being all or nothing. And I think, again, the all or nothing is a very old school kind of take to this stuff. Like, either I don't know why I have Talladega Nights. Either you're first or last here. It's like, no. There's so much between there.
I'm an elder millennial. I'll be 40 this year. And I've seen how people talked about millennials back when I was early in my career. And I don't want to say silence, but we just didn't talk about some of the stuff. And as millennials like myself and you were becoming leaders and leading organizations and hiring Gen Z and this newer generation who wants to talk about this stuff and wants to be able to bring their whole selves to work. I'm seeing the shift dramatically. Are you seeing it with the people you interact with, the leaders of organizations? Are they ready for these conversations that you and I are talking about today?
They're getting ready. I mean, you kind of have to, right? It's kind of like
they're going to have to, otherwise the talent.
It's like, are we ready for the temperature to get hotter? It doesn't matter. It is. So, like, I think there is a part of this that reality, I think, is becoming more and more pronounced. And we're talking right now as we're less than 2 weeks into an administration that has been passing a lot of stuff that is trying to bring us back to the way things were. And what you're seeing is there's some pushback, there's some outrage. But I also think that one of the things that if it's hard to do the kind of the humanity energy around it and the healing part of it, like from a business perspective, from a profitability perspective, like you actually need to acknowledge this stuff, because if you don't, you'll get left behind, because the way the value sets and value systems of the millennial generation and the Gen Z generation are set up, the kind of profits above people thing just doesn't land in the same way. The detaching the work self and the life self being two separate things, like it doesn't happen. I don't know if you've watched the show Severance.
Love it.
But I think it does give us the permission to explore, like, what does that mean? Rather than feeling like I need to download a new operating system overnight to magically be able to handle the vulnerability of the workplace. That's not how it works as a human being. This is behavioral change. It takes time. But how do we give ourselves permission to expose ourselves to new pieces of information, new emotions and feelings that we're having? Maybe ask for help, hire a coach, go to a therapist, do something to allow for yourself to honor that by navigating in this space, it also will ask for a behavior change for you. And I think that patience with yourself then, and that compassion that you give yourself, is contagious as well. And so I think that especially if you're having a hard time with this shift, seemingly overnight shift of millennials are the largest generation that's alive right now, and also the largest generation in the workplace. And, one of the bodies of work that I do is around understanding kind of what millennial leadership looks like. And oftentimes I refer to it more like modern leadership, because I think that the more I talk about it with people, older generations are like, yeah, I want that too. And I'm like, I know the whole point of this isn't you can't sit with us. It's you can sit with us. And also, in order for us to move towards that future, we need to acknowledge the broken parts of the past that aren't allowing us to think that I too can belong. This belief that if you belong, that means I have to be left out in the cold. It's not that, but it really is a permission structure of like trying and failing a little bit and stumbling and watching yourself grow. My poor mother, I bring her up oftentimes as this stuff because she can't avoid having these kinds of conversations with me. But she talks
nowhere to hide.
Yeah, right? She talks about like, well, I'm old. I don't know if I can change that. And I'm like, you're breathing, you're living. And also, I'm hoping you're here for at least a couple more decades. Like, let's go. Like the permission to watch yourself learn new things. And I think the whole idea of neuroplasticity and emotional neuroplasticity, if you give yourself permission for that, like watching and witnessing yourself evolve towards a more values aligned version of yourself versus it being that obedient being that we school systems were created around obedience a lot more than curiosity and learning, and the workplace was that way too. And so I think what we're really having is a paradigm shift conversation, that there's the idea of like, well, if I bought into this whole system that was really obedient and was traditional, does that mean all of the wisdom and experience and how much of my life that I traded off, does that not matter anymore? Because I don't want to let go of that.
Oh yeah. Oof, that's a 2-hour conversation or plus about that right there. That I worry about that all the time. I got 2 kids, and one's in middle school and one's finishing up elementary school. And I sit there and look at like how school systems are structured. I'm like, they're going to be in the workforce in like less than 10 years. And are they going to be well prepared to be ready to have these human conversations. That's one, but adapt to the world that's changing so dramatically around us. And I just don't know the answer. I think the answer is no, it's not ready, and they need to shift something
Well,
fast.
I think that there's a part of this too. Again, you and I are the same age. And so we grew up with like phones that were connected to the wall in the encyclopedia, right?
Totally.
So
we're the weirdest generation of like remembering a time where it was like analog, and then everything's
we're
like,
bridge walkers. We're literally bridge walkers. Part of what I love about this particular age group that we're in is that we have the ability to understand and empathize with folks that are like, wait, but I did it all the right way, and it's not that way anymore. And also the folks that are like, but there's something new every 15 minutes. Come on, keep up. Because that, I feel like there was an iterative experience that we had where we constantly had to learn new things. And I think that as we talk about your kids, I mean, I don't know your kids, but as we talk about the younger generation, I actually think the thing that's so, I don't know, I'm very optimistic about is I think that there is a much broader experience of learning and education that's not in school. And I think that technology has given us, and I hope, and I love school. Like I'm not anti school or education, but I think that giving ourselves permission to realize that we learn things in every aspect of our lives, and we're inevitably going to figure out how to bridge the divides. Even if you take books away or you take education away or you take all of that stuff, if we try to kind of wrangle it in a way that we're trying to control, there are going to be ways that people learn things. And again, I think TikTok was a really fascinating example of how much people have learned through one particular social media platform that was really built more for engagement than it was built for, we'll say profit. I'll say profit. But initially, the kind of different approach to that allowed not only for more human connection, but it also allowed for that kind of non-traditional education while also learning things that you're like, why didn't I learn that in science class? Like, why wasn't that in the book?
Right. So true. Yeah, I'm seeing so many parallels. What we were talking about, like education, but this translates to the workplace too. And it's like TikTok is more than just, and platforms like it are more than just lip syncing and dance videos, right? It's like my son, I've seen him, he's a computer whiz and he's 12. He like will watch TikTok videos. And people, please don't judge me for having my kid watch TikTok videos at 12. But he's like finding like tutorials and things, how to do things on the computer, watching a minute-long video and then applying it. So he's learning in his own unique way. In the workplace, I do the same thing. When I grew my podcast, I was on YouTube, like looking at how to do certain things and edit a certain way. And we cannot avoid some of these cool technologies and methods of learning just because the traditional system of learning was built a certain way.
Or we're scared.
We've got to get creative.
Right? The scared of the unknown part, I think, is part of it too, which again, if you're not allowed to feel feelings and you don't want to be uncomfortable, fear for sure isn't going to be allowed there. Being scared of change will be scary. That's part of the whole being a human thing. Like we are ever changing too, by the way. But like, I think that permission to realize that there's going to always be that juxtaposition of more information, not being certain about things. And I think, again, when I talk about what I think modern leaders can do, and also in a management situation, if you're managing folks, curiosity is so much more important than certainty to allow for trust to be built, but it also creates a stable anchoring experience to realize like, okay, this person is secure enough to ask questions and be asked questions because we can't read the future. But I also think when you're talking about, the experience that your son has, or even you're talking about yourself having, that's like, I can learn this in 15 seconds. This used to take somebody 15.
And it didn't even take an instructor. The instructor has no idea we're consuming the content.
And it used to take 15 years. So I have a workshop that I do around, again, millennial leadership or modern leadership. And one of the kind of issues is this belief that like you need time. Time is the key. If you have 15 years, that means you're an expert in it. And I think YouTube videos alone shows I really just need 15 minutes to learn the thing that took you 15 years. And it doesn't mean that those 15 years that you took weren't valuable. It just means that we have short-circuited that process. Like when we started, and I was saying, if we had to rub sticks together for fire, we'd be spending all of our time rubbing sticks together. But now we have a button. And so if we give ourselves permission to feel that way about the workplace and feel that way about education and feel that way about new generations coming in and bringing new perspectives to the table, rather than saying, hey, you just graduated from college yesterday, maybe you just sit down and be quiet. say, that's a really interesting perspective. We want to add that to the mix. And also, we have experience and perspective too. And I think that, again, when we try to silence and shove things down, it doesn't actively go away. It creates inflammation and eruption. And so the ability to, if we think about it, like metabolize more information and trust that we are in this together versus opponents of each other, looking at it as more of a collaborative, we're in a boat trying to go in the same direction. It allows for especially multi-generational workplaces to hopefully bridge the divides and heal the harm that is done in the ageism that happens across the entire age spectrum. It allows for there to be a cohesive, collaborative, and again, compassionate way of looking at our differences rather than it being a volatile kind of combative way.
Yeah. There's like a theme, and I'm feeling in this conversation. You've mentioned the word curious. You said yourself as curious. And when we collaborate and we're curious and we ask questions, not only to the people, it humanizes them, I think, by asking questions and being curious about their background, but even with some of these tools and technology, I'm thinking like generative AI too, the way you're going to get the most out of this stuff and use it to your advantage to accelerate your career is to be curious, is to ask it questions and to poke holes in whatever you produced and to just keep iterating. And I feel like that's such a human approach if we take that with our colleagues and our employees, just as well as the tools that we're using. I don't know if you have a comment on that,
well,
but
I want to, yes,
curious.
and I'm in my improv energy here. I want to say it's curiosity and play, which again, I don't know that we're ever really allowed to talk about that at work, but like the way that we learn things, if you think about kids in a sandbox, like you play, you are allowing yourself the ability for your creative and innovative mind to learn those things individually, but also together. And so I think that curiosity and play allow for the stumbles and the dreaded failures to actually be data that's collected to move us towards a solution that we need. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm all about curiosity. Again, as the kid that sat in the front of the room with my hand raised as much as possible so I could learn as much as possible, I think I'm a little biased towards curiosity, but I have found that it is one of the most powerful ways to unlock those issues that seem like you cannot fix them, or we keep trying it and we end up in the same place, or we end up running up against the same wall over and over again. Instead of saying, well, use this script, it really is, can we open this up a little bit? Can we allow for there to either be more information, or can we relieve the pressure for getting it just right and witness and watch what kind of shows up in that space? Which again, I think for people that are used to like white knuckling control, the idea of taking a minute and asking a question and not knowing what the answer is going to be can be very scary, but it is really powerful when you give that space to come forward.
For listeners who are curious on how I prep for podcasts, I came in with a plan and I literally threw out the entire script. I asked maybe 2 of the 15 questions that I had listed. So this has just been so fun. I got time for one more question. I think it's an important one. I'm thinking about curiosity, and you said raising your hand. You yourself, biracial woman, you're creative, you're a non-traditional leader, you're an elder millennial like me. For those who find themselves in a marginalized group, who might have the imposter syndrome feeling too, how do we raise our hand? How do we elevate our career when perhaps we don't feel like we have the voice?
I think there's some interesting new conversations, at least in like pop culture level, about imposter syndrome. But I've always felt like imposter syndrome is a sign of a lack of psychological safety rather than an internal failure. And so I think that if we give ourselves permission to acknowledge it that way, my recommendation is usually, how can we find psychologically safe places to start building that curiosity muscle, to raise your hand, even if it's you by yourself journaling. Like, is there a time and a place and a space for you to witness the stuff that's inside you come out, so that you can see it's not as scary as it feels because it's all stuffed down? And so really, I think, especially if you are somebody that has been silenced before you opened your mouth, or you feel that way, or you have constantly seen examples of other people succeeding, but nobody that looked like you or has your history or your background having the success that you're striving for. I think it really is about curating community, or at least examples of spaces that it is okay for you to exist as yourself, even if it's for 5 minutes at a time. I think that the whole kind of idea of finding mentors is one, but that tends to kind of be very heavy. Like, it's like, oh my God, I have to find the soulmate for my career. But instead, trying to find little pockets of permission for yourself to be able to witness. And, you know, one of the things that I like to do, I do group coaching with people. And part of the power of that isn't just like you getting to work with me, but you also getting to work with witnessing other people talk about their issues that are coming up. And usually it's universal, whether the story is completely different or your identity is completely different. There's usually in storytelling the ability to find some sort of human connection. And I think that there is so much power in both being witnessed, but also in witnessing yourself stand up and speak out loud. And then really, truly, I think that the community that it creates gives permission to. Watching another, I think the Me Too movement was a perfect example of this, that you watch the kind of contagious energy of people talking about the like deep, dark things that they thought they were needed to feel shame or protect themselves from. And you watch when other people start sharing things that it's safe enough to say that something happened, and it creates a sense of relief, but it also gives permission for us to see trends and issues that we can then fix. If we can't see them, if we remain silent, especially for those of us whose voices haven't always been given the microphone or haven't had the pen to write history, it is very important for us to be seen and take up space. And so it might not be an easy thing to just grab the mic and walk up there, but how can we slowly move ourselves towards realizing that like your individual impact of existing is very powerful, and that ripple effect, even if it's one person in your life, you have no idea how far that goes. And so instead of feeling like I need to magically become really comfortable with sharing my most vulnerable stuff, or, be, in front of an entire room of people and presenting something right away when I really dread that, what does it look like for me to make micro moves so I can witness that and I can see the importance of me existing in this world and being who I am, and not having to do it through somebody else's script or somebody else's path, somebody else's right way, but what does it look like for me to authentically operate and step in the path that is here for me, and knowing that I might not always do it right, and you won't. I mean, that's spoiler alert. That's the whole point of human error is a real thing. But like, I think being able to witness yourself when you make a misstep, come back to yourself and continue forward. That resilience building piece, I think, is also a, I don't know if you'd call it like a barrier, or like it can help any kind of imposter syndrome stuff from coming up. That resilience allows for, okay, maybe I don't feel confident right now, but it's okay. I've done things when I don't feel confident before and they've gone okay.
Nikki, I've loved this conversation. I want to have you back. We could talk all day. You've done a couple TED Talks. You have a podcast. I don't know if you want to share best way to like look at your work, connect with you, whatever for listeners.
So you can go to NikkiInnocent.com. There's a lot of stuff there. I have a podcast called Checkbox Other, where I interview people about the times in their lives where they felt other, different, or as though they don't belong, and how those informed how they operate and lead in their lives. So I love those conversations. Follow me on social media. I'm at Nikki Innocent on all the things. Hit us up. info@NikkiInnocent.com if you have any questions. There's anything about the stuff we talked about you want to nerd out a little bit more about, or if you want to work with me, definitely let us know. I'd be so excited to even just hear, as we're talking about these things, like the story that maybe came up as I was saying this, like tell us. We care. I care. I think that, again, the human story is, I'm addicted to it. Right? Like I go to like the Moth storytelling things, like that is my favorite way to spend time, is listening to other people's stories. I think witnessing humanity is so powerful. And so if you are called, please do share your experience, any kind of questions you have.
My guest today has been Nikki Innocent. Nikki, thank you for being part of the podcast. I appreciate you.
Oh, thank you. I'm so excited for more conversations with you.
Hey, thanks so much for tuning in for today's episode of Transform Your Workplace. The content on this show is strictly for general information and educational purposes only, so that you can go transform your workplace in a positive way. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on the show are the guest's own and don't represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of either Xenium HR, the sponsor of the show, or me, the host, Brandon Laws. Additionally, Xenium HR or myself, Brandon Laws, doesn't endorse any guest, their business, or any organization they represent, so discretion is advised. We encourage you to work with a trusted advisor to find a custom approach that fits your organization's needs. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode.